My name's Tom Place, this is Chasing Cars, and with me today is the new generation Toyota Land Cruiser Prado. And on the other side, we've got the very popular Ford Everest. And we brought them today for the comprehensive comparison test that you've all been asking for. Now, we've gone ahead and picked the most popular versions of each of them. For the Prado, we've gone for the GXL, and for the Everest, we've gone for the very popular Sport V6 grade. Now, in today's video, we're going to be covering absolutely everything from how easy it is to fit baby seats all the way through to how well calibrated the traction control is on each of these vehicles. I'm going to be taking a look at the inside and the outside of these vehicles, and our 4x4 expert Evan Spence, well, he's going to be taking care of all the off-roading bits. And at the end, we're going to come together and find out which one we like the best. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. So taking a quick look at the cost and the range of each of these vehicles, starting with the Prado. So this kicks off at about $72,000 and goes up to $100,000 if you want to go for the Kakadu. And I'm afraid those figures are before the taxman gets involved. We only have one engine option, and it's 4x4 only. It comes with the 1GD engine, you know, the 2.8 litre turbo diesel that's been kicking around in the Prado for many years now. It's been a little bit updated, though it still produces the same 150 kilowatts and 500 newton meters. So it does have a 48-volt mild hybrid system to give it a little bit of a kick in the lower rev range. Now, the Everest is a bit of a different story. For one, it's a whole lot cheaper to get into an Everest than it is a Prado. It's almost $20,000 cheaper if you're comparing base to base and you want to go for a 4x2 base model. Now, 4x4 versions, they kick off at around about $59,000, and the Platinum tops out around about $81,000. There's a few extra grades being added this year as well. Now, there's also two engine options available. You can go for the 2-litre bi-turbo 4-cylinder version, or you can go for the one that we've got here today, which is the 3-litre V6 turbo diesel that absolutely everyone wants. Now, as tested here today, the Everest is about $82,000 once you get on the road, whereas the Prado, it's a bit more expensive. It starts at around about $87,000 drive away. So a $5,000 cost difference. Will the Prado work off that price? We're going to find out. Now, while I'm down here by the front of these two vehicles, I thought I'd just touch quickly on the headlight performance. Now, both of these are wearing LED headlights, but not all LEDs are created equal, I'm afraid. Evan and myself were driving these two vehicles at 5 o'clock this morning, and Evan was pretty impressed with the performance of the Everest headlights here, but I was not really all that impressed with the performance of the Prado's headlights. They were very dim and just weren't really up to scratch. Now, further up the Prado's range, you can go for some brighter LED headlights, but you don't have the option to go for things like matrix LED headlights, which is offered on the Everest Platinum, which, you know, immediately is a good tick in my books, but also the fact that these headlights are also really great performers. For me, that's a big tick for the Everest right out the gate.
So the big question, Prado versus Everest for 2025, which is the most capable four-wheel drive? I already think I know which is a better car, but off-road, that's what I want to find out, which vehicle is best. Obviously, these vehicles have a lot in common. They're 7-seat four-wheel drive wagons, but there are some differences. Suspension-wise, the Prado uses a traditional 5-link rear end with a panhard rod, whereas the Everest uses a Watts linkage, which is essentially 2 panhard rods cut in the middle so the axle stays level. On articulation, we've got a V6 in the Everest, and it's sweet as a nut, I must say, versus the 2.8 in the Prado with its hybrid system. It's good when it's moving, but it's a bit laggy off the line. How's that going to translate to technical off-road driving? Well, let's find out. Another thing I really do give points to the Prado for is its transfer case system. Now, you can lock this in low range without the centre diff lock, meaning that if you've got a trailer, you can reverse that up a steep hill using low range without getting transmission wind up. That's really helpful. However, we do have a very clever system in the Everest as well that allows you to run 2-wheel drive or all-wheel drive on-road. But again, I'm here to show you how these vehicles work. Let's kick them up this hill. Let's throw some dust around because we're on private property, all in the aim of science. Which is best, 2025 Toyota Prado or Ford Everest?
We're inside the Prado, so what I've done is I've put it into low range, which is very easy. Put the vehicle in neutral, just push the switch into low range. I'm going to leave the centre diff lock off. I know what's going to happen here. It won't make it up the hill, but I'm just going to crawl up, and then after that, we'll see how far we get. I think it'll get most of the way, but it won't make it all the way. Then I'll put the centre diff lock in, see if that works. Sort of expecting that it might, but if not, I'll then try crawl control. If it does get up with the centre diff lock, then I'll come back and do crawl control anyway, because I just want to try that out. So, first point of this test, can it make it up the hill, just cruising, low range four-wheel drive, no centre diff lock? Let's find out. Really slowly, like again, I'm not driving this how you should drive this. I'm driving this to see if we can't make it up. not getting anywhere there. Okay, so now I'm going to put the center diff lock in. Center diff lock in, and we are not getting anywhere. So let's try crawl control. Get that on the slowest setting, maybe dial that up a bit. No. So that's not working. Okay, so that's coming down a driver error there. So we've got everything on. What I'm going to do now is just back down. We are getting a little sideways, and this is a very steep hill, which you don't want to get sideways on. Well, that was interesting. So the Prado certainly has good traction control, but it wasn't able to make it up driving incorrectly. You need a little bit of momentum. So if I turn that off, low range, center diff lock, and just give this a smooth roll, I reckon it will get up straight away. So let's do that. Walk in the park, absolute piece of cake. So let's swing around and go down the hill. Need a better name for it. I love this property. We've been here for many years and it's just great. Great to have our own little playground. First gear, low range. Let's see how the gearing is in terms of going downhill. So I'm going to try and foot off the brake, just hover. Righto. Yeah, that's great. That's got really good reduction there. Happy with that. Prado done. Let's check out the Everest. Inside the Ford Everest now. Now, there's a few things to navigate. Controls, off-road. We've got diff lock. So I'm going to put it in drive, for low, terrain mode. Go through off-road status. Normal, eco, tow haul, slippery, mud ruts, sand. So let's go straight to normal. We're in normal mode, low range. Give it the absolute worst chance of getting up this hill because the Prado did make it up with a little bit of momentum. Everest has got a little bit better tyres. Personally, I don't think it's going to make it up as easily. This is a more road-focused vehicle in my opinion. And we'll see if we can just crawl up. It's got more power. You've got to be kidding me. The Everest made it up first go. In normal mode, low range. This is what we test because I walked into this thinking, nah, no way this car's going to do it. I've driven this off-road before. Let's have a few more cracks at that because it might have gotten lucky. So let's try a few things. Let's get a bit tricky here. So I reckon the Everest got lucky the first round. Why is this thing so capable? Okay, so that's turning the locker on automatically too. So let's try this again because I think that's why this vehicle's been so capable up our little test hill, because it's putting itself in the best mode possible. And that's not what I want. I want it to be in the worst mode possible to find weaknesses. Been a bit cheeky, it's too capable. And I didn't think it would be. I thought this vehicle would be good, but not as good as it has been. So let's again try that without the diff lock in. Low range, normal mode. Okay, and it's just cut out too. So we have an answer. The diff lock turning itself on has made the difference. Will it climb out with the rear locker on? No. So gravity's not on our side, so okay. We have a verdict here. This vehicle, it's very clever. It's a very clever vehicle, the Everest. It's doing everything for us. So let's start at the base of the hill and just give it a little bit of a hit and see what happens with the locker off. If we can roll through this with momentum. Yeah, okay. That didn't do it as easy as the Prado. Whoa, this is a tricky verdict. These cars are so capable. I'm gonna have a bit of a think about this one. We're heading back down the hill now, our little test hill. First gear, low range in the 10 speed. So obviously having so many ratios. Yeah, that's got wonderful gearing. Pretty similar to the Prado, and obviously the Prado's crawl control. It's really good being able to dial it in. We do have hill assist control. Again, I'm not that into it. I'm not going to bother because the 10 speed is really good off-road in terms of low range reduction. Bit of a poke through a river crossing here. It's not much, but it's pretty rocky, and I'm more interested to see if it's going to bottom out. It's a big gully right in the middle, big rock that I'm trying to avoid. just found the hole. Interesting, okay, yep, we're scraping on some rocks there. Let's see if we can make it across to the other side. So again, oh, there's a rock. Whoop. This thing's so capable. This Prado, the traction control system is unbelievable. Having said that, in that situation, a diff lock I would have absolutely loved. I would have hands down grabbed the locker because it would have kept me straight. And what happened was that rock kicked me sideways and it just kept sliding. Let's go back through and see if we can make it through and then give it a go with the Everest. We're on the side steps there. Okay, now we've got a really muddy climb up out of here. I'm going to have to give it some. Oh, we've done it. That was not glamorous, but the Prado got us through. I'm going to jump in the Everest now and see if we can keep up. In the Everest, we're going through that river crossing. It's a little bit nerve-wracking because so there's a big muddy entrance and a massive rock on the passenger side. I want to try and avoid. Now, I want to do this without the diff lock just to show what it's like. But if I need the diff lock, I can easily push that in. Oh, she's bottoming out the front. Definitely. Oh, low on clearance. That traction control's not working, so I'm going to put that rear diff lock in. Oh, we are stuck. Let's try a different line. Ooh-wee. Okay, the diff lock definitely helped there, but you could tell the traction control was not as reactive as the Prado. It doesn't have the same amount of suspension travel, and yeah, not as capable as the Prado, I don't think. But the rear diff lock absolutely saved the day there. I thought we were going to be getting snatched out of that little spot. So let's cruise on back through. We'll take a more square line here and just dunk it straight in. Let's go lock her off again. We're sliding and scraping. Back wheel off the ground. Front wheel, yeah. Whoa! It really makes you work for it. So yeah, good that it's got the diff lock because you're going to need it in the Everest, I think. Still really capable. These are such great wagons. We're really lucky. If you want a V6 diesel 7-seater, something you can drive off-road, spend a lot of time on-road, Everest is a good thing. But in terms of a pure off-roader, a touring vehicle, performance-wise, I'm going to say the Prado is the better off-roader.
Well, there you go. I told you I wanted to show you, not tell you about these vehicles. They've been through the same obstacles, and as you can see, the Everest has copped a bit of damage. We don't like damaging vehicles, but that is part of the testing program. You can see it's just unclipped. It's a two-piece bumper. There's no real damage. We'll be able to put that back in, no problems. Sorry, Ford, but it should be fine. But it shows you the difference here in construction. This Prado hasn't got a scratch on it.
So what's it like to drive the Ford Everest Sport V6 on the road? Well, it's for the most part a fairly solid vehicle. You know, the range has gotten all kinds of praise for how well it drives on the road, but in theory the Everest should be even better again thanks to its more sophisticated general setup. It's not designed to be a workhorse, it's designed to be a family rig, and for the most part it really does excel at those responsibilities. That coil-sprung rear suspension is a little bit firmer than that of the Prados, but it's generally pretty compliant. And I also think out here on these country roads, it shows its value. It shows that Ford Australia has tuned this car for Australian conditions. It takes lumps and bumps fairly well, and you don't feel like you're being bounced offline when you find an unexpected obstacle mid-corner, which is always very encouraging. I would say critical for a vehicle that you're going to be spending a lot of time in these country areas. Around town also, I think the Everest really shows its advantage over the Prado. It's a little bit smaller in pretty much all dimensions. It might only be a little bit, a few centimeters here here or there, but don't underestimate how much that can make your life easier in your day-to-day driving. You know, there's a person at my daycare who has an Everest Sport as their everyday vehicle, and I noticed that they actually have a good amount of room for them to open their doors, for example, to get kids out and the like. You know, whereas the Prado is just a little bit bigger, and I think that that's going to make your life a little bit more difficult in some respects. Not a game changer, but certainly something to consider. Now, of course, the thing that everyone loves about the Everest is the 3-litre turbo diesel option, and it is just such a good engine. It's so beautiful and smooth. I know that it's got a slightly narrower torque peak than that of the Prado, but it's got 100 Newton meters extra to play with, so you can afford to have it be a little bit more peaky. And on the move, it doesn't feel peaky, and the reason for that is because we have this 10-speed transmission, which Ford has done a really good job of calibrating for this generation. It's a bit smoother off the line than the Prado as well, and combined with the smaller dimensions of this vehicle and the smoother drivetrain, this is a much nicer vehicle to drive around town, and I really do have to give the Everest points for that. They've done a great job with this vehicle. Now quickly, I'm just going to touch on safety. The Everest also scores points when it comes to its safety package. Now, the Everest was tested under more lenient 2022 protocols when it was awarded 5 stars by ANCAP, and unfortunately the Prado was tested a few years later in 2024 under those more strict protocols. So it's not quite apples to apples situation, but it's the best we've got, I'm afraid. And when looking at those ratings, it's really impressive to see both vehicles have 9 airbags. But the Everest performs really well when it comes to child occupant protection. It was rated at 93%, which is really quite good. As far as adult occupant protection, it was rated a bit less at 86%, but also considering that in both of those metrics, it beats the Prado, I think that is a very impressive performance. However, one thing I will note that is a huge negative for both the Everest and also the Prado is that on these grades, the Sport and the GXL, neither are fitted with tyre pressure monitoring systems. You have to spend extra money and go further up the range to get that very basic and I would say critical feature. You know, it's nice to have things like driver monitoring and blind spot monitoring and things like that, which can be helpful for keeping you safe at some times. But what could be more critical to the safety of yourself and the car than knowing that the condition of the tyres is okay? I think it is a really critical feature and they shouldn't be penny pinching in this area. Jumping into the Prado now, and one thing is pretty immediately obvious with this vehicle, and that is the 1GD engine. You know, it's been around for a long time and it's got a lot of charm to it, but there's another word that you could use in place of charm, and it's quite unrefined. You know, it's not a very refined engine. You know, it's a 4-cylinder, you know, it's got almost the same displacement as the Everest with its 3-litre V6, but it's got 2 less cylinders, and that really does come across quite heavily in the cabin here. There's a bit of insulation, but evidently not quite enough. And driving the Lexus GX with its smoother petrol motor, you know, same chassis as this and more insulation, yeah, it's a pretty night and day difference, I've got to say. I must say I was quite surprised when Toyota first released the details for this model, and it turns out they didn't add a single kilowatt or newton meter over the old model. It still makes 150 kilowatts of power and 500 newton meters of torque, which aren't bad numbers, but when you consider that if you compare this to the previous generation GXL with the flat tailgate option, this weighs 270 kilos more, so it's got a lot more to pull around, and it's also just a generally bigger vehicle. So there definitely was, I think, a bit of justification for a more grunty powertrain up front. Now, to be fair, Toyota has added a little bit more grunt in the form of the electric motor that forms part of the mild hybrid system. It adds about 8 kilowatts of power and 65 newton meters of torque to the mix, which is always very welcome. But the problem is that because it's an electric motor and because of the way the 48-volt system works, it only really does most of its hard work. You can even see by the skew there, it's only 8 kilowatts of power and 65 newton meters of torque. It's really doing most of its work at low speed. So for example, if you're towing a 500 kilo extra heavier trailer than you would with the old Prado, you're probably not going to get that assistance once you go for those higher speeds. And I did notice this driving on some country roads over the last week. One instance in particular was when I was trying to overtake another vehicle, and once I got over 100 k's an hour to complete the overtake safely, I found myself running out of ground very quickly. And this was really quite concerning, and I don't think it's quite good enough for a vehicle this large and this heavy. Now, Toyota has added an 8-speed automatic transmission that has more ratios than the 6-speed in its predecessor, and that has helped things for sure, but at speeds over 100 k's an hour, it definitely does need some help.
The Prado also benefits from sitting on the same premium TNGAF platform as the 300 series full-size wagon, offering a more sure-footed driving demeanour on the road than the Everest. The Toyota also benefits from having a permanent 4x4 system that provides more consistent power delivery in situations such as climbing up hills when compared to the Ford, which makes use of an on-demand 4x4 system. Combine these two factors together and the Prado is also the more stable and consistent vehicle on high-speed dirt sections. That said, there isn't much between them.
Jumping into the interior of the Everest now, I think the main takeaway from this space is the fact that it has everything you need and also a few nice extras as well, which I think is really appropriate for this grade. In terms of fundamental levels of space up front, I'm 6 foot tall and I feel pretty comfy here. The floor isn't too high, though it is a bit lower on some other rivals in this segment, but look, I'm pretty comfortable. There isn't as many soft touch areas in this cabin that I'd like. I'd love to have a bit more padding down here, but on the door top here, that's very nice and soft as well, so you can put your arm there while you're on those long drives. In terms of features, it's pretty loaded in this cabin, I gotta say. Look, we do have some downsides, like for example, we don't have a real leather steering wheel here. This doesn't really feel all that nice, but it does the job, and it's, it's not a plastic steering wheel at least. But we do have genuine leather seats, and we also have both heating and cooling, which is fantastic and not something you get on the Ranger Sport, so certainly something to note there. And that leads me to another point. It's 37 degrees today, as you can probably tell by all the sweat coming off my forehead. And one thing I was surprised by was how good the air conditioning would be in the Everest. The fact that we've got both good air conditioning and also ventilated seats means that this is a very livable car on those very hot days. Perfect for Australia. Focusing on the seats, I don't think that the ones in the Everest are quite as good as those in the Prado, though one point it does have over the Prado is the fact that we do have lumbar adjustment, at least on the driver's side. So you can really dial in the seat to different body types, which I think is really important because a lot of big blokes are going to be driving this vehicle. Taking a quick look at the tech, because there is a lot of it here in this cabin, we've got an 8-inch digital driver's display right in front of us. You do get a full width one on some of the more plush grades, but I don't really think that's reason enough alone to upgrade, especially when we have the 12-inch touchscreen here on the sport grade. This is what really matters. So the 10-inch one on the lower grades, I still find to be perfectly fine. Some of the things I do like about this is the fact we've got wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto, which is fantastic. We have an 8-speaker stereo here as well, which is pretty good, though I will say that the B&O stereo on the high grade, that is really good. So if you're looking for a really good stereo, perhaps it might be worth stepping up to the higher grades. But anyway, that's enough for the front. Let's jump in the back. Jumping into the second row now, and at 6 foot tall, sitting behind my own driving position, it's really quite impressive how much space I have. Got a good amount of room in front of my knees here, and you'll also know that there's a nice cutout in the front seats here so that you can stretch out and have a bit of a wiggle on those longer drives. As you can see, because of the higher floor here, this is a body-on-frame vehicle, my knees do sit a bit off the bench here, so I'm not getting that support that would be nice on those longer drives. But for the most part, it's all right. I think it's certainly in terms of space. In terms of the shape of the bench here, it's a little bit flatter than I would like personally. It would be nice to have a little bit more bolstering, but look, I think it's okay for the most part. The center seat here, I think you could fit someone here, but perhaps not a full-size adult. I'll also note that the seats here, they do slide forwards and back, so you can free up a bit more room in the third row, as we'll check out in just a second. In terms of amenities, we don't really have much in the way of them, to be honest, though in the Sport we do get things like privacy glass for the rear windows here, and we also do get some things like USB-C point, USB-A point, and a fan speed controller here. And Ford has wisely put the air vents here right up in the roof, so it blows directly on your face, and that's really good for the family buyers out there. You want to be sort of warding off that car sickness. Speaking of family buyers, how well does this thing fit a set of baby seats? So we've got the forwards facing seat in place now, but we're going to open the back door right now to see how the rearwards facing seat goes. So look, it opens to a pretty wide angle, though it'd be a little bit nice if it went a little bit further. It's certainly not the end of the world. I'll pop in the seat now. And look, yeah, look, it fits fairly well. I will say though that I had to move the front passenger seat forward a little bit further than I would have liked. On the plus side though, you do have ISOFIX points on the outboard seats here, and also you do have top tether points for the third row, though not ISOFIX points for the third row. So look, you do get a little bit of flexibility here, though it definitely could be a little bit better in terms of that center space for sure. Jumping into the third row, as I said for the second row, there's a little bit more room up there and those seats are slidable. So I've had to move them forward just a little bit so I can get here with some sort of reasonable levels of comfort. My big boots, unfortunately, don't really fit under the seats all that well. So look, overall, I think this is definitely a kids only space, unfortunately. In the way of amenities, we don't really have all that much. We do have an extra set of air vents up here in the ceiling, which is lovely. And we've got some small cup holders on this side and that side. But apart from that, that's it. Jumping into the interior of the Prado now, if you've seen our comparison with the 150 series, you'll know what a huge step up this cabin really is. It really blends modern design with that great utilitarian function that we really come to love about the Prado. The Ford Everest is a little bit more modern in its design, I'd say. It's a bit more tech focused, you know, that big touchscreen in your face, which is really great and really useful. But at the same time, it's also nice to have things, for example, in this Prado's interior, like fully separate physical controls for the climate control here, and it pretty much feels like everything in this cabin can be operated with a closed fist. It's just got some big chunky buttons here that's really rewarding to press. You know, we've got this big shifter here, much more intuitive than the Everest, and it's just really easy to understand, and I really do like that about this interior space. In terms of the amount of space that we have on offer in the Prado, I'm 6 foot tall and I'm pretty comfy in the front row of this vehicle. I will note there's also a good amount of soft touch surfaces around here, you know, on the armrest here. I will note that the top of the door here is really hard and I found that quite uncomfortable when doing my long 5-hour stint in this car this morning. The seats are a little bit softer than that of the Everest. You can definitely tell where the American market influence is in that regard, and they don't hold you in place as well when you're going in those fast country back roads, but at the same time, they're certainly very nice when you're sitting in them for a long period of time, but you don't have lumbar adjustment like you do in the Everest. It's also good to note with the cabin of the Prado that while visibility is actually quite excellent in this vehicle, the mirrors here I'm not really sold on. They're just incredibly narrow, and I'm not really sure why Toyota has gone with that decision. By comparison, the Everest over there, it has much wider mirrors, and I definitely think that if you're doing any kind of towing at all, you're certainly going to want to get some extra long mirrors there. But at the same time, I really think even for general duties, they should be a bit larger than that. As far as amenities go, it's kind of interesting. In comparison to the Everest, which has a fake leather steering wheel and real leather seats, in this we have a real leather steering wheel and fake leather seats. Though I must say the material itself is actually fairly rewarding to touch. But let me know in the comments down below, which one of those combinations would you prefer? There's just a lot of stuff going on in this cabin in general, though, I've got to say. We've got 3 separate USB-C points down here. I've also got a HDMI point, so you can beam up multimedia onto this 12.3-inch touchscreen here. This 12.3-inch touchscreen, by the way, has wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto, just like the Everest, so that's great to see. And just like the Everest, we also have a partial digital driver's display. Now, similar to that Everest, we also have heated and cooled seats and really strong air conditioning to boot. I will note that the heated and cooled seats is something that you get when you go for the GXL. It's a really worthwhile step up. We're going from the GX to the GXL, I find. Just the amount of equipment they throw at it is really quite impressive for the price. Jumping into the second row of the Prado now, and it's pretty similar to the Everest back here. I've got a good amount of room in front of my knees here. I'm 6 foot tall, sitting behind my own driving position, by the way. And I also, similar to the Everest, also don't have much in the way of under thigh support here. But because I do have that extra room here, I can move around and stretch out and things like that on those longer journeys. So that's certainly very nice indeed. The seats here, they've got a little bit more of a contour to them than they do in the Everest, and I think that'll be appreciated on those back roads. And I do think, look, you can probably fit a small child in the center here as well, but similar to the Everest, I wouldn't want to have a full-size adult here for a long period of time. As far as amenities go, we do have one extra feature over the Everest, and that is the fact we have a separate temperature control here for those in the second and the third row. The air vents are located up here in the ceiling where they should be, and we also have things like a 12-volt socket and USB-C points to keep kiddos' devices topped up. So look, overall a pretty good second row. So what's it like to fit baby seats in the Prado? Well, open the door here. Comes to, yeah, not a great angle, I gotta say. A little bit less than the Everest. We've got our forwards facing seat in here already. It fits pretty well. We'll chuck in our rearwards facing seat here. Yeah, look, once again, it was a similar situation to the Everest. I've had to move the front passenger seat forward a little bit more than I'd like, and also a little bit more annoying because there's no passenger adjustment on the front passenger seat. But look, overall, I'd call that a pass for sure. And just like the Everest, in the third row, you still do have some top tether points on those seats, though no ISOFIX points. Jumping into the third row now, and I'll show some footage now of me getting into the third row, because you'll note that the second row doesn't slide anymore, but it does have a tumbling function, which does make it easier to get into than that of the Everest. Once you're inside though, the space is pretty much the same. I'm 6 foot tall, I don't fit fantastically back here. My boots don't really fit under the seats in front of me. We do have some amenities back here though that make it a little bit nicer, like some bottle holders. We've also got some USB-C points on each side of the car, and of course, these lovely air vents. So these are family vehicles. How much can you fit in the back of them? Before we talk about space, let's talk about how you get to it. Now, the previous generation Prado had the ability to go for 2 different tailgate designs, one with a spare wheel on the back and the other was the flat tailgate design. You don't really have a choice anymore, unfortunately. You just get the flat tailgate design on the 250 series, but it does have a nifty little trick, which I really do like. And it's the ability, if I press this button here, you can simply lift up the glass. So it opens in a split direction, and what this means effectively is it's much easier to put little odds and ends in the boot when you're on the run. Really fantastic thing, especially when you've got the car backed all the way up to a garage door, for example, and you don't have the space to open the full tailgate properly. So very nifty little thing and nice and easy for your everyday life. All right, so both of these have power tailgates, which is really great because I bet these tailgates are not easy to lift. And we'll open the very noisy Toyota one, which feels the need to beep incessantly for some reason. And we reveal that we've got a 182 litre boot here with all 3 rows in place. And over here, it's a 259 litre boot. Now, when you fold down the third row, it actually reveals that the Prado has technically just a little more space than the Everest here, but they're both around about 900 litres. But nevertheless, I think you'll agree that the Everest really takes the cake here in terms of the boot design. For one, it's just a lot lower. You can see that this boot floor here is completely flush, and when you fold down the third row of seats, it goes completely into the floor. In a complete contrast over here with the Prado here, of course, we've got this famously pretty terrible design, which consists of these seats which sit really high up on the boot floor. And we also have this box here, which levels out the boot floor, but it's just really not a very good design. I'll explain a bit more why. Now, coming out close to the Prado's boot here, because honestly, I was a little bit baffled at just why this boot was so terrible. And a lot of the reason comes down to the 48 volt system. The 48 volt system is located under the third row seats here and the boot floor here, and it brings up the height of everything. Interestingly, when you look to other markets which have the Prado, but they have the Prado without the 48 volt system that we get in Australia, the third row of seats here folds completely flat into the floor, and this is also flush with the boot level here. So look, I think that's honestly really disappointing, and it gives us a bad result on a number of levels. For one, it's just a lot higher. You know, I'm 6 foot tall, and this is almost chest height. You know, the ground's a little bit uneven here, but even still, I think for a lot of buyers, that's going to be a little bit of a difficult thing to try and get heavy items up and over to that level. Also, there's just so many little holes where things can just fall down and get lost, and even down here by between the third row of seats and the second row of seats, there's a massive amount of area there, and because those second row seats aren't slidable, you can't close up that area. Honestly, it's such a poor design that I wish Toyota would just offer a 5-seat option across all their grades, because this third row option, I don't really know if it's justifiable if you're not using them regularly. Now, in terms of outright fuel economy, the Prado with its new 48 volt mild hybrid system really does take the cake here. In terms of combined fuel economy figures, it's about 7.6 litres per 100 Ks, and combined with a 110 litre tank, which is unfortunately a little bit smaller than some other versions of the previous Prado, will still get you about 1500 Ks on a single tank. Whereas the Everest, it's a little bit more thirsty. Such is the tax for going for that bigger engine, I'm afraid, but that'll still get you about 1,000 kilometres on a single tank, and it drinks about 8.5 litres per 100 Ks driven in combined conditions. So I wanted to just touch on the payload and towing situation. Unfortunately, we don't have time for a full bore towing test today, but I wanted to lay out the numbers as they lie. So both of these vehicles have a brake towing capacity of 3.5 tonne. The Everest Sport has a payload of 703 kilos, but the Prado is a little bit less. The GXL here is rated for 615 kilos, which is actually 110 kilos down on the old flat tailgate version of its predecessor. And you'll note that its predecessor had a brake towing capacity of 3 tonnes, whereas this is 3.5 tonnes. So you're towing more, but you've got less payload to deal with it, which seems like a really bad situation. And I'm not really sure why it's so bad. Even when we look to the Lexus GX, which is of course a sibling with this vehicle, even with its twin turbo V6 engine, it's still got 10 kilos more in terms of payload. I'm not really sure what's going on here. Why does the Prado not have more payload? But realistically, I think both of these need a GVM upgrade if you're going to be doing towing with them regularly. But even still, in stock form, I don't really think that's good enough. In truth, I've never really had a verdict that was just so hard to decide. The fundamentals of the Prado are incredibly strong, from the way it drives off-road on all sorts of surfaces, all the way through to some fairly segment unique features, like the ability to do about 1500 Ks on a single tank are so impressive. Whereas the Ford Everest here, it has a significantly cheaper price tag, has a really well packaged interior, and it's just overall a very well-rounded vehicle. In the end, the fate of our loser came by the death of 1,000 very small cuts and a lack of innovation. If Evan and I were picking which of these cars would take home for ourselves, we would go for the Prado simply because we prioritise off-road capability. But we need to think about here is how most people are going to use these cars most of the time, and it's for that reason that a Ford Everest is our winner today. The Prado unfortunately just falls down in a key area, and that's in its role as a family car. See that silly boot and also the second row that doesn't slide anymore, but also things like the headlights not being bright enough and the payload not being enough to really support that 3.5 ton towing capacity realistically. But the Everest here doesn't just win because the Prado tripped up in some areas. That V6 turbo diesel comprehensively outperforms the 2.8 litre even with its new 48 volt mild hybrid system. That's all we've got time for today in our video. What did you think? Did you like our assessment of this vehicle? Please let us know in the comments down below. Don't forget to also give us a like and subscribe if you want to see more. But for now, that's all. Thank you for watching Chasing Cars.